The moment when I think the song really hit for me was in the spring of 2023. And I was in this somewhat familiar place of just feeling like no matter what I did, it was never going to be enough, like just not enough making enough impact, not enough reaching people with my work. This constant, like, sort of nagging slave driver in my consciousness that's like, you got to do more. You're not doing enough. You're not making the most of your life, of your opportunities. And I was really like feeling that pressure, that sort of existential angst of like, oh, there's so much in me that I want to get out, and like, am I ever going to be able to get it out enough to be satisfied and fulfilled? And then I started thinking about just the concept of like, the temporality of life and the fact that these lives of ours are not forever, which I think about a lot. It's always been kind of a theme in my creative expression. And I was in this inquiry of like, when the end of my life comes, what would I have had to have achieved or accomplished in order for me to really be satisfied? Like, what would really cut it, And I really got like, I don't think there is any amount from this place, from this like bottomless, hungry ghost kind of place of like, it's never enough. It's probably some unattainable goal, some like elusive, forever moving target. And so I started to ask a different question. I started thinking about like, what if it's not about how much I can do and how much I can achieve? It's just more like, how can I show up as like love, as a being that is just like showing up as love, being a source of love to the people in my life, to the people that I serve. And something in that like allowed me to soften into this place of feeling what it would be like to really have that kind of love for myself, to just feel like, yeah, it's enough, I'm enough. And then really sensing the sort of universality of this plight to try to establish our worth and our value through what we achieve and what we accomplish and what we do, rather than just being loved for who we are, for just the essence of who we are, which I think is something that, is universally a human longing. And I think for the most part, none of us have ever really had that to the degree that we actually really want and need it, to the degree that we could experience it if we were in the presence of like true, divine, unconditional love. And, our parents did their best, but they probably didn't have that either. And so they gave us the template and the model that they had. And so we're all kind of going through this human experience trying to earn our love, earn our worthiness of being loved, prove our value, establish our worth through what we achieve and what we do. And meanwhile, this like experience of just being loved for who we are is constantly eluding us. And I think so much of our human doings is fueled by that. And it's exhausting. I was exhausted. And whenever I like land in that mode of doing, I get exhausted. It's very depleting. So yeah, that's what the song really speaks to. That's the kind of love that I want to cultivate, that I want to stand for. And then from that place, whatever we do is like, it's an expression of our wholeness. It's an expression of our worthiness. It's an expression of the essence of who I am is enough. And I'm doing this thing because I feel inspired, because I want to give, or I want to share. I want to learn, I want to grow, I want to evolve, but not because I'm not good enough, unless I get to some goal or some level, because that's the hamster wheel. Yeah.
What was the catalyst to revisiting it?
Well, as I mentioned, that voice of you're not doing enough, you've got to do more, that sort of state was really present. And I think it was present in conversations I was having. And a big part of it too was, my mom had just been diagnosed with cancer, and something that I'd feared my whole life, which is losing one of my parents, was really confronting me as a potential much sooner reality than I'd imagined. And so this concept of like, there's going to be an end, and legacy, and what are you leaving behind, and just being present to how much of an impact my mom made in her life, and how many people she served and touched, and how big she loved. And so, within that, like, the healthy expression of this longing, and also the shadow of like trying to live up to something that felt unattainable, So I feel like that was a big part of it, when it really kind of switched on as like the deeper meaning of what this song really meant, and what the medicine of it was, and how that was really connecting to me at that time when I think I first really shared it. It was like a video that I shared, and a lot of people seemed to really resonate with that message, that just like that deep desire to just be loved for who we are, not what we do.
Who do you feel like you're singing to?
Well, I think it changes, now. I can sing any song, and depending on what's alive in my current reality and my relationships, that can influence how I'm singing it and how I'm feeling it. But when I wrote it, it was really a conversation with myself. It wasn't about my relationship with anybody else. But as I said, it took on new meaning with everything that happened with my mom. And, our relationship went through a huge healing and transformation that was precipitated by her getting sick and her diagnosis, and just being confronted with the potential of losing, the matriarch of our family, the woman who gave me life, who gave me birth, literally the portal through which I entered into this physical experience. And so that, I feel like that made its way into the song, and it was definitely really with me when we recorded the song, for sure. Because I went through a really huge cracking open.
So you mentioned that you wrote it in September 2022.
Yeah.
It was right around when you were launching Golden, right? The fall of 2022.
Yeah, yeah.
It's like during your rollout of Golden.
Yeah, that's actually true.
Yeah. So I'm curious, your relationship to your service, how that's changed since when you wrote the song to now.
Yeah, it's funny that you mention that, because a lot of times when I put music out, my kind of creative expression goes quiet for a while. And I think what was really interesting about this is it was like the first time in a while that I was like, oh, I've got music coming out, but I'm still creating. There's still new inspiration flowing, and that felt really exciting to me. And I know very well that there's something in the lyrics specifically that points to something that I've been, very aware of in myself, which is like this, it's a specific expression of the overall message of the song, but it's like in the realm of doing personal development, inner work, healing, and transformation. It's like that in and of itself can become something where we become achievement-oriented, productivity-oriented. And I definitely have that like insatiable hunger for evolution, for expansion, for growth. But to the point where I started to realize like, this is just another place where this distortion is playing out, where you essentially aren't really connected to your wholeness, to your inherent worthiness, and you're going and doing this essentially beautiful thing, this thing to better yourself, but you're doing it from a place of lack. And that can also be really detrimental and exhausting, So I'm here to live and learn all there is to learn. That's me speaking. Like, yeah, I've got that in me. I've got this hunger, but I also just want to be loved for who I am, not what I do, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, Golden kind of still is like a bit of a mystery to me. Like, it's still kind of revealing itself to me. I feel like I really needed to get that collection of songs like out of my system, A lot has actually changed since then in terms of what's coming through me musically. There's been a really deep connection to my ancestry, to my Egyptian ethnicity, to my roots, to a much more non-verbal chanting and a sort of a melodic palette that feels very different from anything that I created before, up until now. And a lot of that music is still being explored, being discovered. But it's funny because when I listened to the original Portal opening, the recording of Kind of Love, there was a bit of that going on, like in the melody. It turned into a real song, a traditional song with a very clear lyric, but I was just chanting. I found a couple chords that I liked, which are chords that I sing over often, but it was on the piano, so it felt a little different. And so yeah, there's a deeper connection to the medicine aspect of music, to the shamanic capabilities of music, to the potential that music has to really hold space for us, for me, and for the people that I get to share music with, in spaces where when we use our voices together, it's really not about, a performer and an audience. It's about like gathering around the sacred fire, gathering in circle, in ceremony, and using our voices and chanting in this sort of ancient way that is how we remember who we are, is how we return to our wholeness. It's the antidote to all the things of the modern current way that we live that make us sick and that disconnect us from our souls and from our essence. And I feel more committed to that and more connected to that than I ever have in my desire to make music or allow music to come through that's really in service to that. And then to bring people into spaces where that's the intention. So I do feel like that's evolving, in a very interesting and in a way that feels beyond my identity as an artist or anything that I can reference stylistically that I've heard, which feels really exciting, because it's like, okay, this feels like I'm entering uncharted territory for the first time in 20 years of creating music and using music as a modality for my own growth and healing and transformation, and as my primary form of artistic expression. It's taking me somewhere new that feels really deep and really rich and connected to my ancestry and to my soul origin. And it feels really relevant and connected to where we are collectively as well. This sort of concept of like ancient future, that we're having to draw on the wisdom of the past and the wisdom of our ancestors in order to really help us to get where we're going. And I think music and art experienced collectively in community and in sacred settings with intention is a huge part of that path. So that is what I'm ultimately really inspired to be of service to and to live on purpose for.
Made me think about Dream Camp, because that was kind of your reintroduction into the world.
Yeah.
After this sort of grief portal. Yeah, I'd love to hear just about the transformation you underwent through the grief, and then now kind of what that feels like on the other side of it.
Well, there's a lot to say about grief. For me, It's something that I've always feared, actually. Like unknowingly, there's been a fear of death and a fear of loss that was really actually just a fear of feeling that unique energy and emotion of grief that I did not have a familiarity with, in the sense of not knowing how to process it, how to be with it. I was never taught. I don't see it really being talked about a lot in our culture and society. It tends to be the elephant in the room of our human experience, that, this is temporary, that we're all going to go one day, and we're all, going around living our lives like we've got forever. And I think in my culture, there's a lot of unprocessed grief in my lineage. And so I think I've always had this unconscious and then more and more conscious fascination with death and loss. And so going through this experience of losing my mom and really being by her side and watching the whole unfolding of her going through this illness and eventually, transitioning and leaving her body, I made a conscious choice that I was going to really lean in and not shy away from all that it was bringing up. From the moment there was a diagnosis, which brought up so much grief, and every moment along the way where something changed and the previous version of her that I knew was no longer available, and the previous version of my family dynamic that I knew was no longer available. And of all the things that I've ever done in my life to grow, to evolve, to heal, I have never experienced a more potent medicine, a more powerful alchemical agent than the medicine of grief. This transformation enzyme that sort of had its way of finding the nooks and crevices in my being and my consciousness where there may have lived or remained something unprocessed of mine in my family system. So much of that had to be really felt and processed, and is still ongoingly moving through me and my family system. But it was a huge agent of healing, of transformation and liberation, because in a way I faced my fear of something that had been haunting me my whole life. And I really feel like my mom gave me a gift in that, in allowing me and us to be a part of this really sacred experience. The beginning of life is sacred and beautiful, and the end of life, as painful and as tragic as it is also sacred and beautiful. And that veil, that portal between heaven and earth, between the visible and the invisible, opens. And if you are connected to somebody who's making that transition, you have the opportunity to also go on that journey. And so I feel a very deep connection to, that soul level connection that exists between a mother and child, family members, a lineage, my ancestors. And there's definitely a fire that's been lit in me around, and a deeper understanding around why I actually do what I do, which is really wanting to create spaces where people are permitted to grieve, and that doesn't have to be grieving the loss of a loved one or grieving a death. It can be grieving a change in our health. It can be grieving a change in our life. Even positive changes elicit a grief response. The change of the seasons even can be something that brings up grief. When we go from summer to fall into winter, there's something about these ever moving changes of the human experience of life, of nature, that are so natural and such an essential part of life, and yet it's scary, and there's a tendency in us that wants to hold on. And to the extent that we want to hold on and we're not able to fully embrace and meet those experiences with our hearts open and with a willingness to feel fully, that's when those energies, those experiences, that grief can get stuck in us. And then all of a sudden we can get sick, or we can have stagnation or density that lives in our bodies and blocks our creative expression, our voice, etc., etc. So I feel really cracked open by the experience. I feel like my channel has been really cleansed in a lot of ways, and there's been an opportunity to shed this cloak of grief in a way that I didn't really know I was carrying for a long time, that was weighing on me. That was a sort of heaviness that I could feel, but I didn't really know where it came from or who it belonged to. And I think some of it was mine, and I think some of it came down the ancestral line, and some of it lived in my immediate family system from experiences that my parents had had. And it's just all a part of my human experience and life. And we all have a story like that. And our life is going to necessarily bring us through seasons and passages where that change, that loss of what was, will create an opportunity for us to feel grief. Which, the deepest understanding I got through all of this is that the grief is just an expression of love and appreciation for what we cherish and what we value. So if we value life, of course we're going to grieve death and loss. If we value a loved one, of course we're going to grieve the end of a relationship or the end of a season of our togetherness. If we loved a home or a place that we lived or a job or whatever, and it changes, of course we're going to grieve it, because that's our felt sense of how much we appreciated it, how much we loved it. And to cut ourselves off from that is actually robbing us of the opportunity to really honor that thing for how much we truly value it.
And there's nothing more to get. I just wanna be who I am, nothing less, that's the truth. I wanna be loved, accepted for my essence, not what I do.